Listening to the 9 to 5 Faith podcast.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to this episode. I'm here with my friend Carla. Carla, how are you doing today?
I'm doing so good. It is the beginning of March. We've made it. We've made it through
Yes.
February, the shortest and yet the longest month of the year.
Yes. It is crazy that we're still only 2 months into the year and it feels like it's been a long year thus far.
It's been a long year.
Yes. Well, so glad to have you on the podcast and so glad to have this conversation because, again, I say this a lot, but I can't relate to celebrity speakers or infamous people. I can relate to normal people. And I think there's a lot of people out there who are normal people. So let's talk about life in a normal person's world. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah. So I am a single mom of 3. I have 3 young adult children, and my 9 to 5, if you will, is I am actually in a new assignment. I just started a new job about 3 months ago. I'm the chief people officer for a financial advisory firm here in Indianapolis, Indiana. It is a hybrid office of about 35 people, which is almost completely opposite of the assignment I was in for the previous 2.5 years, which I was a chief operating officer for a fully remote team for an online membership community. And so it's just really been interesting to kind of adjust back to having a local network and having to put shoes on every day. And
so you are working in office?
I am. It's actually hybrid. So I try to be in the office at least 3 days. It's really been more like 4 days a week. But I do reserve Fridays for working from home and trying to do very little to no meetings so that I can kind of keep that as my deep work day. It doesn't always happen. But I'm also chalking that up to, I'm still in my first 90 days. I'm coming up on my 90 days next week. Right. So that's always a whirlwind of activity anyway.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that no meeting days are always good. At my company, we have no meeting Fridays. So every single Friday we get to block out and everyone respects it. Even so much so that people apologize when they have to slack you about something. I know. I respect the boundaries, but I'm y'all, it's messaging. It would be like if we were in the office and you had to ask me a question. That is fair game equally.
Yeah, that's so good though, to have a culture where people really do respect those boundaries.
Yeah.
Because it's so, what I have found after being back in an office environment after 2.5, almost 3 years of not being in one, is I do enjoy the buzz. I enjoy that energy and kind of seeing people and having those unintentional connection points of I'm getting coffee, you're getting coffee. How was your weekend? But I do find for myself, I have to put my headphones in and just really focus because I tend to be oh, who's walking by? Oh, so
I'm the same way. I've seen something floating around the internet where it's someone who has a sign taped to the back of their chair and said please don't disturb me. I will talk to you and I will not get my work done.
Yeah. Which is a unique thing for me because my role is chief people officer. And so I do feel torn on a lot of days where my job is the people. I'm the chief of people. And so if the people need me, I want to be available. And also there is tenacity type work to be done. Even in my job, it's not all meetings. And so I do have to be a grown-up about my own schedule and just block those times. And just like what you were saying with your office, people are pretty respectful about that.
Yeah. Yeah. And one thing I noticed when you were just talking is you talk about your assignment,
Mhm.
which that language really intrigues me. You're not saying my new job or my
No.
career, it's your new assignment. Can you tell me
Yeah.
more about that?
Yeah, I think this came about a number of years ago for me, and it really came from a place of seeking the Lord for, I think a lot of us sometimes grow up in a faith or even come to faith and we're wondering like, what is my call? What's my calling? And it's this really big, ominous, like if I get it wrong, it's like
Yeah.
hitting the wrong button. And really, God, just in his kindness and his graciousness toward me, really led me down a path of understanding that my calling is the same as yours as a believer. It is
Yeah.
to bring glory to God. It's to be an imager of God. That's my calling. But the way in which I'm going to do it could look very different than the
Right.
way it's going to look for you. And
Mhm.
that really came to a place also when I went through a relational change. I was, as I mentioned, I'm a single mom, but I wasn't always
Mhm.
a single mom. And during that time of change and transition and grief, I was really seeking the Lord for like, is this it? So I now have to check a different box on a piece of paper that, when it comes to my status. And is that it? Like that's the end of my call. That's it. And what I realized is that even things like marriage, like parenting, like your bank account, those types of things that are important and weighty in this world, but temporal nonetheless, they are just our assignments. And
Yeah.
assignments, they come and go. They have start times and end times. God doesn't always allow us to be privy to what those dates are,
Right.
but it really comes down to understanding that no matter what your assignment is, God is calling us to faithfulness in that assignment. And so that's really the way that I have approached my jobs, but also just the various seasons of my life. I look at each season and each opportunity, each door that God opens as an assignment, and then seek Him for how to be faithful in that particular, where He's placing me.
Yeah. And I think that releases so much of the like kind of paranoia of like, oh, am I doing what God's wanting me to do? What if this is like going back and forth with all those questions? And um what really grounds me in all of that is like there is nothing I can do to screw up God's plan.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
that is a very like freeing sense of like even if I suck at this assignment, like God is still God at the end of the day.
That's right. Yeah. And he's so gracious and he's so merciful to us. And assignments are really opportunity. They're opportunity for reward, they're opportunity for promotion. I don't just mean that in the job sense. Like, promotion, even when you think about growing up and going to school, you're moving from grade to grade, and it's every time you're stepping into a new grade, there's some things that you're like, oh yeah, I learned that in the last grade and I'm taking that with me. And some things that are just brand new and you're not going to be an expert on it on day one, which I think for a lot of us is a really uncomfortable place to be. But it should be an invitation that draws us into a greater intimacy with God of, okay, this is new, but you aren't in the dark about how to operate in this assignment. You've prepared this for me beforehand. And so my role is just to walk in faithfulness and in relationship with you through this assignment until the end. And that end for some people is, like my mom, she worked for the same company for 50 years. She had one employer her entire adult life. And I've probably had 50 employers.
Yeah.
It's the opposite. And so it's not the same for everyone. And I think that that's just, if I were to issue a permission slip today for people, if I were to put on my Mama Hayden hat and issue a permission slip, it would be just be faithful to your own assignment. And that comes from the Lord.
Yeah. I think God is doing something. I don't know what it is, but I think he is doing something in the workplace in kind of this idea of like a higher turnover rate for
Mm,
employees because you don't hear of people spending 30, 40 years at a
yeah,
company anymore. You don't. And
yeah,
it's not necessarily the regular workplace. And so I think there's something to be kind of said about that. I don't know what it is, but I think there
yeah.
is something there.
You know, I'm really glad that you brought that up because my role is one of leadership and I love, love, love leading leaders. And one of the things that I would really encourage leaders in today, Christian leaders specifically, is this idea of that you, in your role as a leader of a company, of a team, of a group, whatever that is, you're really called by God into an assignment of being a marketplace shepherd.
Mm.
And so it is such a privilege and an opportunity to shepherd people in whatever season they're in. If that's their first job, their first big girl job out of college, that's your opportunity to shepherd a young person in how to carry themselves in the marketplace, whatever your industry may be.
Mhm.
If you're shepherding somebody who is walking toward retirement, you have such an opportunity to help them finish well. And then everyone in between, you know, doing a good job in their everyday, and people who want to get promoted and grow in their leadership and management. And, you know, the way that I look at it is there's just no reason to be upset when somebody wants to leave your company because they have a quote better opportunity. You know, I've always really approached my leadership of people as, okay, the Lord has sent you to me for a certain season of time, and maybe that's 6 months, maybe it's 6 years, whatever that is, but it's still just a fraction of time. And how can I help you show up as your full whole self in your job? Do, you know, contribute high value to your job and whatever that looks like, because when somebody feels fulfilled in their role, it's a positive cycle. You know, they
Yeah.
they feel fulfilled, they feel seen, they feel known, they feel wanted and loved, they bring their best self. When they bring their best self, then everybody wins on the team. And so, you know, if that person is there for a short period of time because God is bringing them there, it could be to heal from a previous toxic workplace or
Yeah.
toxic boss. It could be a place of gaining courage and confidence. Maybe, you know, they were pursuing something and something happened at their previous employer, or this is their first time stepping into a role. It could be where it's a bridge to the next thing. Whatever that is, like, there's just no sense as a leader to be upset when somebody leaves. If they're good, they're gonna leave.
Yeah.
If they're good, they're gonna get poached,
Yeah.
and it's okay because God's gonna fill your hopper back up with other people that need whatever
Yeah.
you have to offer.
Yeah, and I think there's a tendency in today's workplace to try to fit like a square peg into a round hole with this just like constant like promotion, promotion, growth, 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 growth kind of
Yeah,
mentality. And whereas like some of the best leaders I've ever had in the corporate world are have said to me, I want you to be fulfilled and I want you to grow how you want to grow. And if that happens at this company, great. But
yeah,
if it doesn't, like
it's okay. Yeah,
you're free. Go
yeah,
do what you need to be doing. Um, because I'd much rather have a leader who was encouraging my growth in an organic way versus into a forcing kind of trying to make
that's right.
everything fit way.
Right. It really comes down to alignment, right?
Yeah.
Alignment in your assignment. Your company has an assignment. You have an assignment. This could be a season where those two things align. And then
Yeah.
there could be a world in which those two things don't align at some point. And so I'm always going to be somebody's biggest support while they're in my company. I'm going to help to clear roadblocks and obstacles to their success in the company. But when it's time for them to leave, I'm going to be their biggest cheerleader, you
Right.
know, and I'm going to help them finish well because they are going to be launching into something else, even if that something else is their own gig. You know, I want them to finish well with where they are.
Yeah. Oh gosh, there's so many good things. I'm like, let's have you again on, Carla, and we'll just talk about leadership in the workplace.
Let's
'Cause
do
I
it.
feel
I'm
like that
passionate about
that's a
that.
secondary conversation that definitely needs to happen. But let's talk about you. And so like you're in office, you're in this new
Mhm.
gig, you're finding your flow, you're finding your rhythm. What does kind of like the day-to-day of Carla look like, and how do you make sure that you this is going to sound bad, but how do you make sure to keep your faith at the forefront and fit God into the schedule of someone else?
Yeah, no, that's a really great question. Well, first of all, I will tell you that just like everyone else, I've had to adjust specifically over the last 2 to 3 years. And then me specifically, I've had to adjust over the last few months of like I mentioned at the top of the show, like I have to put shoes on now.
Yeah.
I have to allot for a commute time now where my
Yeah.
commute was 10 steps, 10 literal stairs from upstairs to downstairs, and then I'd be in my office.
Yeah.
I the way that I go about it, so my everyday looks almost exactly the same in the sense that I wake up and immediately have a cup of coffee. I mean, I'm not coffee with Carla for nothing. So immediately black cup of coffee. It doesn't have to be fancy. It could be Keurig. It could be pot brewed. It doesn't have to be, I don't actually have time for the pour over. Like just give it to me hot and straight.
Yeah.
But cup of coffee. And then I have my time with the Lord, and that's always in the Word, always every single day. But that is a practice and a discipline that is over 20 years in the making. I mentioned that I have young adult children now. They weren't always young adults. They were young at one point. And so this has been a practice that I have developed over the course of 20 years, over the course of multiple and varied seasons of time. A mom of young kids, a homeschooling mom, a mom that had a part-time job, a married mom, a single mom, being kind of just a cog in a wheel to now being a leader in a company and everything in between. And so, the what that looks like for me is I don't even really think about it anymore in the morning. It is the first thing that I do. And it's not always a delight. Sometimes I'm exhausted. Sometimes I've stayed up way too late, binge watching something on a school night, and I'm tired.
Yeah.
And what I have found recently is when that happens, I still have my quiet time. But number one, I will choose to read the word out loud in my out loud voice. So that helps. It helps to keep me a little bit more focused. It also awakens my soul and spirit because there is power in the spoken, audible word of God. And, we know in Hebrews, it talks about faith comes through hearing and hearing by the word of God. And for me, it's like even if I don't feel it in my emotions, I believe in that power that's happening. And so as I'm speaking out, and even if it's just the Psalms, it doesn't have to be, Deuteronomy. It could just be the Psalms, and just saying it out loud and allowing the Holy Spirit to hover over those spoken words and do the work within me and trust that work. And I have found even just as recently as this week that I wasn't feeling it when I was starting, but as I got into it and just again, faithfulness and obedience, just as I got into it, I actually found myself weeping. That came out of nowhere.
Yeah.
And I realized that really what it was just a tenderizing of my soul and my spirit. And that sometimes when you're a 9-to-5er, you're just going from one thing to the next, from one meeting to the next, one email to the next. And then to take that time to stop. It's almost like a paradox. It's like you're to take the time to stop at the start of your day and to invite God into that space. And would I love to be there for 2.5 hours? Yes, but that would require me to wake up at a time that nobody should be up, quite frankly.
Yep.
But I do what I can, and I trust that God sees my heart in it. And it's really, it's making that time. So I have it every morning. And then get ready for the day, you take a shower, get dressed, put my makeup on, and all that time I'm usually listening to a podcast. And so I'm usually listening to either a leadership podcast, because for me, leadership is my craft.
Right.
And so I want to be better at my craft. I want to sharpen my skills and my tools. And so I'm either listening to a leadership podcast that is put on by somebody of a shared faith. So not just any leadership podcast, but there's a lot of great ones by Christian leaders. Or I'm listening to a spiritual formation podcast, because sometimes my brain is overloaded with learning of like how to be a better leader, how to, improve employee engagement, how to do this and that. And sometimes my brain is like, I can't take anymore. And so I'll listen to a spiritual formation podcast. I'll listen to maybe a message that I might have missed from my church, or, some other church, or, podcast that talks about the word. And I just let it kind of rain over me as I'm taking a shower. And I don't try to take notes or anything like that. I just trust that what I'm supposed to hear, I'm going to hear.
Yeah.
And then my commute to work is about 10 minutes. So it's long enough where I can prepare as I enter into the day. At that point, I'm usually listening to like worship music or something, just to kind of, again, refocus my heart. And it's not so long though that I have road rage. Long commutes I cannot do. So it's just the right blend. And so that's my day. And then, I'm usually in the office between 8:30 and 9, and kind of there till about 5, maybe 6, depending.
And how do you like demonstrate your faith in what you do every day in terms of your work and your job? I mean, I think that, as Christians, we're called to live a different life than the world around us. And the likelihood is the people around us are not of the same faith. So what does that look like for you?
First of all, it's excellence in whatever I'm putting my hands to. Not perfection, but excellence. It's taking the time. It is taking it seriously. I look at it as being an assignment from the Lord, and I want to be a faithful steward, a good and faithful steward of what he's entrusted to me. And so that's number one. It's not slacking off. It's not, using company time to do personal things necessarily, or, even in this day and age of work-life balance, it's just making sure that I'm getting my work done. If that's 10 o'clock at night as opposed to 10 in the morning, so be it, but I'm getting my work done. The other thing is, it's about my attitude and my posture. I think there is ample opportunity to be negative in this world. There's a lot to be afraid of. There's a lot to complain about. There's not a shortage of reasons to gossip or groan. And so for me, I, again, take very seriously my role of being a marketplace shepherd. I'm leading those sheep, whether or not they know that that's what's happening.
Right.
And so it is leadership by example. It is coming in and, you don't have to be super sunshiny all the time, but a smile goes a long way. A good morning goes a long way. Just those things. And just having a positive attitude towards problems, having a solutions minded, using my creativity to be solutions minded versus just like getting into the muck and the mire with people.
Right.
One of the things that I have implemented in the last number of assignments that I've had is I do a thing called Coffee with Carla. And what I do is I schedule one-to-one meetings with each of my employees, and I just use it to get to know them as human people. And so what I believe in those meetings, I mean, we talk about what's your favorite food and, what's your favorite music and all that kind of what some would consider surfacey things.
Right.
But then I get into what's an accomplishment you're the most proud of? What is a fun fact about you? Tell me about your Enneagram type or your working genius. And I really take the time to hear their story. I think each person is so fascinating. And when I give them that dedicated hour where I'm face to face with them, locking eyes with them, I really believe and I pray, Lord, help me to see them the way you see them. because you delight in them and you're fascinated by them. And so help me to have a facial expression that reflects that, so that if nobody else in their life or nobody else in their day sees them, that they feel seen by me as a representative of you.
That's beautiful. And I think too, like, there might be a tendency to kind of overcomplicate faith in the workplace, but I will say, like, I had a coworker who, whenever she would message you on Slack, she would just be like, "Hey, Paige, how are you?" Or "How's it going?" And she wouldn't get to the next work thing until I answered. Usually when we're sending message, "Hey, how's it going? Can you help me with this?" Blah, 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 right? Like, and going down the list. And really, she started with the human approach and started and kind of doing that and adjusting the mindset in meetings or in one-on-ones where we're like, okay, human first, work second, right? I think that has a really strong impact on our relationships with people.
It really does. And today, in today's world, you really can't have enough empathy for people and you can't encourage them too much. You know, these are the two things that for me, well, I guess three: excellence, empathy, and encouragement. That's what I bring to the workplace as an imager of God. And I'm the only female on an all male leadership team in a pretty male dominated industry. And that's taken some courage and confidence on my part to be fully female in that space, which looks a lot like nurturing. And what I have found is that even if it's foreign to them, they want that. They want it. And so that is just something that I've had to lean into and rely on God to give me the affirmation for, because in the beginning, I think it feels a little like, oh, she's very empathetic, or wow, she's really taking a more human approach, you know? And it's not that the bottom line and the numbers don't matter. It's just that data is more than numbers. Data is also story. And kind of leaning into that story side of things with people, not just what are you producing? What are you closing? What are you, what are you checking off?
Yeah. And I think too, especially in today's day and age, with like being a female in the workplace, I feel like there's been kind of a trend to have to match your male counterparts instead of stepping into into your fullness as a woman.
Yes, I agree with that.
And I feel like that's exactly what you were saying, of like, it doesn't look the same. And the fact that you are more nurturing and more, I guess, humanizing isn't a sign of weakness. It's a sign of fullness in your femininity or whatever you want to call it. And that's how you're called to lead.
It's true. It's true. And we all have the same objectives that we have to meet as a company.
Right.
But the way that we get there could be different. And so again, it goes back to aligning with that company's values, aligning with how they want to get to the end. That's really important for me. Like in an interview process, those are the things I'm vetting before I take a job, before I accept an assignment is, like, is this going to compromise who I am first and foremost as a Christian? Secondly, is there a place for me here? Are they really going to allow me to be fully me? And all that means.
Right. Yeah. And I think I can't really speak for the male listeners out there, but from what I've experienced, good kind of stewardship of your maleness in the workplace looks a lot like strong and thoughtful leadership in terms of setting the tone for meetings or for conversations on that level. And then also extending, I've experienced a lot of like the males extending equal ground in a meeting, if that makes sense, of like giving everyone a voice at the table. It might not be weighted equally in their minds, but the good leaders I've seen have accounted for all the voices in the room.
Right. Well, and again, it goes back to walking in excellence in your job. Your work is going to speak for itself. So male or female, if you're not
Right.
doing a great job,
Yes.
you're going to have a really difficult time gaining the respect of your leadership.
Yeah.
But if you're doing a good job, that's noticed, especially in this day and age. So
Yeah. So interesting. And I think there's just like, again, we're going to have another conversation about male and female energies in the workplace and
yes,
how to step into that, because that's a whole other thing.
that's a whole nother conversation.
That's a few conversations.
That could be season 3.
yeah, exactly. So stepping into your assignment, how would one know what their assignment is?
That's a really great question. I can't speak for everyone. I know for me, it has kind of felt and manifested very similarly from assignment to assignment. And usually it starts with some type of level of discomfort. And I can liken it to, I've had 3 kids. It's when you first start feeling those contractions, you're like, they don't just come on suddenly, like sharpshooting pain. It's more of like, I'm a little bit, that doesn't feel so good, but you're still breathing okay. You're walking around, you're carrying on with life.
Yeah.
And then it increases over time. And so when I start to experience that, it's an invitation from God into a conversation. Like, what's happening here? And usually his response to me is like, just start noticing, just start paying attention, and usually after that, there will be emails that might come from people I haven't talked to in a while, or, things that might surface, random things, podcasts, billboards, like whatever, where you're just like, interesting. I'm seeing 2 or 3 of the same type of thing. What's happening? So it's really just following the breadcrumbs. But for me, it's that antsiness, that like level of discomfort first. It's having a conversation with God of like, okay, it's happening. But for anyone who has ever birthed humans, labor could be an hour, it could be a day, like you don't know. So just because you're feeling that, I would encourage people, just that initial feeling doesn't mean turn in your 2 weeks notice the next day.
Right.
It's just an invitation of like, oh, something is stirring. And so my encouragement in those seasons is like, just stay focused and stay faithful on your job, on your assignment, your current assignment, until you actually know. And then things start to open up. Doors usually start to open up, or I'll put my feelers out and just say, hey, I might be back on the market soon. If you happen to know of anybody that could use my skills, my experience, let me know, and we'll just see. Because even when a new assignment is given, like I think about David, like he was anointed king and then stayed in the shepherd role for many years. And so I think, there's a level of understanding the timing of God in things.
I made a pretty big, I guess, slightly traumatic job change last year. And if anyone wants to go watch my video of like my current state of mind, it's on my LinkedIn, where I posted a very I probably would not have posted that today, where I'm like in my sweatshirt, no makeup on. It was like 11 p.m. I was like highly emotional, but like sitting in my closet talking about like how I could be really upset about what was happening at work, but also at the same time, God's peace in that was so overwhelming.
Yes.
And that was the first time I have ever experienced like a peace beyond all understanding.
I'm so glad that you said that, because that really is a big part of this for me. I follow the piece, not the paper. So for me, sometimes my assignments have seemed like a step back in my career. In some cases, they've been a cut in pay, or a reduction in responsibility. And, I think from a worldly human standpoint, it's like, you're going the wrong direction. You need to go up the ladder. And what I've said is, my career has been less climbing a corporate ladder and more scaling a rock wall. Like sometimes you're moving just laterally. Sometimes you're going down and then back up. Sometimes you're, kind of taking 2 and 3 steps at a time just because you happen to get some good footing. And so, I would say like follow the piece, don't follow the paper.
Oof. Gosh, that's good, Carla. And I mean, it's true. And funny enough, like, my husband has since, I guess, like repented of his mindset in that season. But like, I was like zen. I was good. I was like, God, you got this.
Yeah.
And he could not chill with it. He was like so uneasy in it. And I was like, no, like it's fine. It's like, but when is it gonna be fun? I'm like, I don't know. God knows. I don't know. Yeah, but it was funny to see like a really clear kind of black and white version of like the two sides of the coin that can happen of like he was following the paper in that regard of like, hey, you don't have another job. You can't quit it. And I was like, no, like that's what God's telling me to do. So it kind of like makes sense. And and going down that path.
Absolutely. And there is a world in which having other mature believers speak into that, pray with you through it, and just getting that confirmation. Another thing that for me God has been so gracious to provide is I get an assignment scripture before every new assignment.
Wow.
And I get to hold on to that in the transition phase because oftentimes it's not as clear cut as like you're done here and now you're going there. There's a phase. There's kind of like a pre, a during, a post.
Yeah.
And so being reminded in those shakier times of like, did I make the right decision? And having the actual word of God that I can speak over myself, pray over myself, put on a Post-it, all the things. He has given me one in every job, in every assignment I've had since 2015.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. And like something to center yourself on.
100%.
When like the times get tough, because like, I feel like there might be the inclination as Christians to be like, oh, I love my job every single day and it's always perfect. And, birds help me get dressed in the morning, but like that's not real. And so difficulty happens. What would you say to someone who's like, I'm experiencing difficulty in my job? Does that mean I'm in the wrong assignment?
Not typically.
Right.
I would say that the Bible tells us that we don't battle against flesh and blood. We battle against spiritual forces, and those forces are actively operating in opposition to us inheriting and possessing all that God has prepared beforehand for us to walk in. And so sometimes that difficulty that we're experiencing, it's not because we're doing something wrong. As a matter of fact, it could be because we're getting closer to stepping into the thing that is right. And I would just remind people that not all stress is bad. There is good stress. Like when you think about, people that lift weights or do, weight bearing type workouts, that's how muscle is built. It's a breaking down and then a repairing and a rebuilding of those fibers. It's not always the breaking down. Like we know, like when it comes to trauma and things, it's like too much too soon, all of that. So we're not talking about chronic stress. We're just talking about difficulties, inconveniences, pressure. It's not always bad. It's sometimes for our good and for our benefit. And when I think about that, I think about, well, then what is true in the body is also true for our souls and our spirits, that sometimes God does allow us to walk through those hard and heavy times because he's using it as a season of training and preparation and strengthening because he knows what's coming up next for us. And he is actively wanting us to get the reward. He's actively wanting us to take on greater levels of responsibility. And that's his way of preparing us for it. And so, again, follow the piece, not the paper. If it's hard, but you have that undeniable piece about it, then press in because you're actually being prepared for something great on the other side.
Yeah. And I think once you step into kind of like meditation with God and like with his word, you grow in discernment around
Mhm.
God pushing you in a different direction, and then like earthly and spiritual forces pulling you or trying to create a divide. It does feel very different.
Yeah,
And a
it
lot
does.
of the,
It does.
yeah, and a lot of the times I think like where I'm like, okay, I always akin it to like, okay, if I have to ask, like, is this God? It's probably not God. Like I said it when I got married. I go, how did I know my husband was the right person? Because I didn't even have to consider, is this the right person?
Mm,
I just knew it was the
you
right
just knew.
person for me to marry. And so when it comes to God, like if I have to question like, is this God pulling me in this direction? It's probably not.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you've been mentioning a lot about faithfulness in your
Mhm.
assignment. What does that mean to be faithful in your assignment and not just to do it?
Yeah. I think I kind of take it back to what I had mentioned a little bit earlier about David. You know, David was a shepherd first and foremost, and God was using that seasons of his life to not only strengthen him physically, but to prepare him for how to lead. He was leading actual sheep, and then he was leading the sheep of Israel. And I think about that because again, he got anointed, and then it was like, all right, you got to go back to work the next day, you know?
Right.
And so even if in your heart or in your mind, God's given you a picture of where you could be or what you could do, whether it's in your 9 to 5 or your side hustle or whatever, you still have today. You still have the work for today that you need to put your hands to. And so faithfulness looks like inviting God in and asking him, how do you want me to partner with you today? What are you doing in your kingdom, in the lives of the people that I work with, or even in my household? And how do you want me to partner with you in those things? And sometimes that's send a really well-crafted email. And sometimes it's take a coworker to lunch and listen. And sometimes it's, you know, burn the
Not
midnight
sending that
oil this one
email.
time. Yeah, exactly. It could look like a lot of different things. It could look like good craftsmanship, you know, if you're in the blue collar field. I mean, it's going to look like it's going to look differently for different people, but what it is going to look like is recognizing that we do have a master that is coming back, and that is going to hold us to account for the things that have been entrusted to us. You know, I think about the parable of the talents, and whether you have been given 1 or 5 or 10, you have to live in accordance with what you've been given. If you're highly talented and skilled and gifted, you can't be lazy about that, because God has gifted you with those things for other people. The gift isn't for you. You know, when a tree bears fruit, it's not for the tree's benefit, it's
Right.
for others to enjoy. It's the same thing with the gifts that God's given us. So whether you're a writer or a singer, or you're an executive, or you're a construction worker, whatever that looks like, the gifts and the skills and the talents and the experience that God has allowed you to have are actually for the benefit of others. He uses it to benefit you in exchange through your paycheck and your benefits and all that kind of good stuff. But faithfulness looks like recognizing that you're playing a part in God's plan, and recognizing that you going to work every day, that there isn't just the work, there's the work beneath the work.
Yeah.
You know, that he's inviting you into.
Yeah. And I feel like, at least it's true for me, when I was kind of going through like the high school, college phase, where I was like, what does God want for my life? Kind of what we were talking about at the beginning of like this existential question. And I felt like there was a lot of, it might have been self-imposed pressure. I don't even want to say cultural pressure. It was probably just my brain. Like that
I can
got
relate to
stuck.
that.
That got stuck in the mentality that like, if I wasn't in ministry, then I'm not building the kingdom. And I feel like that's the furthest thing for like from the truth, because what you're saying is like, it's not always just about like what tangible things you're doing for the kingdom.
Right. Yeah.
Because there's God works in other, like, a crazy amount of ways. And I had one of the members of my small group, she even said, like, God might have had you just for that one. He might have had you there just for the one. And
Yeah.
if your whole life you were in that job and it was just for that one time, then that's worth it. And that was like, whoa, like that took my breath away. Cause I'm like, man, like that is like one, can he do more than one? Of course he can. He can do whatever he wants. But like maybe it was like a humbling moment of like, maybe I'm just being called to serve one person in my job. And everything that I'm doing is leading up to that moment, or maybe has like that moment's already passed and I'm kind of on the tail end of that.
Yeah.
That's humbling.
It's very humbling. And I think about the scripture in Matthew 6 that talks about that God sees what you do in the secret place and he rewards you openly. And I hope that that comes to bear upon people, not as a like, but more of a like, even when you feel like, what does it matter? Like my boss isn't even noticing that I'm, spending the extra 5 minutes proofreading this email or, whatever that is. But God sees it. God sees everything. He sees the posture of your heart towards your work. So even if externally you're doing a good job, he's also seeing the posture of your heart, that your desire to love other people, your desire to serve him and image him in that way, it all counts. It all matters. And it's all going to be worth it in the end.
Yeah. Yeah. I worked at a summer camp one year and they called it Bump the Lamp. And like that was the going above and beyond and doing things with excellence was called bumping the lamp, because here's a bit of a throwback. The Who Framed Roger Rabbit movie. And there's a scene where Roger Rabbit and I can't remember the main character's name are like wrestling and tussling and getting into it in like this back storage room. And Roger hits the lamp and the lamp swings, but the lamp was on. And they spent hundreds of hours reanimating that scene to get the light to swing over the scene, right? This was back before like really advanced animation was happening. And it was all because Roger bumped the lamp. And so every time I hear like, go that extra little mile, do the things with excellence, it's just to bump the lamp. But no one would ever see that in the film now. No one ever thinks of that.
Exactly.
And it's not recognized.
Exactly.
God
Which
sees.
is PS why fun fact about me, I read from cover to cover books. I read the acknowledgments section. I read the dedication section. I watch the credits on a movie. And even if I can't read all those names, I do sit in awe at like, it took this many people. Like this it's not just the lead actor or actress. It's not just the name on the front of the book cover that, the author. It's many, many, many people contributing to that work coming to fruition. And sometimes the contribution is, thank you so-and-so for watching my kids, or for, for cooking dinner while I went in my hole to write or whatever. And I just think about that. And so, we're going to be on credit scenes all over the place and we don't even know it. And so
oh gosh, that's beautiful. I've thought very similar things with the credits in movies, because I'm like, while it might not mean a lot to me, it probably meant the world to this person and this person and this person and this person.
And their parents.
And their parents and their grandma and grandpa and maybe their kids one day. Funny enough, my husband, he's a trademark lawyer. And so one of his clients had like a trademark problem in a movie. And so at the end of the credits in one of these movies, it says like, so-and-so is a trademark of blah, blah, blah. And my husband's like, I made that happen. And I was like, I felt so proud. I was like, okay, so like this is just like a little disclaimer at the end of a movie, let
I
alone
know.
like people who work on the sound and the props and the wardrobe and all of that.
Yeah, it all matters.
It all matters. It all matters. Well, gosh, we got into a lot of it, but I have a feeling I know what you're going to say, but I want to give you the opportunity to actually
Okay.
say it and add anything else you want to say. But what is something that our listeners can do to implement a faith building discipline or practice into their life or their work life like this week as they're listening to this?
Yeah. I mean, I would say schedule your time with God.
Mm,
Have a daily quiet time. If you're not a morning person, you're not a morning person, but have a daily time with the Lord. And I really encourage people who, maybe don't have one yet to schedule it in your calendar the way that you would a meeting or an appointment, because that's what it is. The living God wants to meet with you. He wants to share his heart with you. He wants to bring healing to you by speaking truth over places where lies, might be residing. He wants to be able to share his heart with you for not only you, but for the people that you're encountering in your job. And it's going to be the most transformative meeting of your day. So make the time for it.
yeah.
And so I would just say that. And then, as I kind of mentioned earlier, read scripture out loud, like read it with your out loud voice. And even if it's just, if you're in a place where you don't have a lot of space and there's other people there, even just reading it out loud under your breath, there's power in that. And so, yeah, I would just say schedule your time with God and read the word in your out loud voice.
I love it. And you're Coffee with Carla, so you can have like coffee with God. It's your one-on-one time with God.
It is. I have it. It's literally in my calendar, and it's just a recurring appointment every single day.
You don't even
And
have to reschedule it.
I don't. It's every day, even when I'm on vacation. Like that's how I start my day.
Yeah. Oh, that's beautiful. Carla, thank you so much. And we will talk again.
Okay.
I am like ready to dig into some of these things that we didn't have time for today. But where can people find you?
Well, they can connect with me on Instagram. I'm at coffee_with_Carla. And also on LinkedIn. I'm at Carla H. Hayden on LinkedIn.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Carla, for joining us. And we'll catch you next time.
Sounds great. Thanks, Paige.
Thanks for joining us. If you liked what you were listening to, make sure you subscribe and hit those 5 stars, and we'll catch you on the next episode.